In this video, we're going to take a look at quadrilaterals and specifically trapezoids and kites. So in our first box of notes, we have a little picture of a trapezoid, and it says the base angles of an isosceles trapezoid are congruent. So I'm just going to draw another one over here. So it's already got the information we need, but a picture of that would be something like this, where you have an isosceles trapezoid, so it has the legs are equal, so that's what those little tick marks represent. And then the base angles are these two at the bottom. Those are base angles, so those are equal to each other. And then the ones at the top are equal to each other. Those are base angles. Even though those ones are at the top, we still call them base angles of a trapezoid. Now let's just use that property to look at a few examples. So in example 1, it says finding angle measures in trapezoids. ABCD is an isosceles trapezoid and the measure of angle B is 102. Find the measure of angle A, the measure of angle C, and the measure of angle D. So using that property we just wrote down, if we have 102 at the top, the other angle at the top is a base angle that would be congruent to that one. So we know angle C, let's put the measure of angle C is equal to 102 degrees. To figure out the two at the bottom, we know that we could do a few things, but we know that these would be supplementary. And so 102, if we subtract that from 180, we get 78 degrees. So these base angles should be 78 degrees. Another way you could look at it is that all the angles in a quadrilateral, so like each one all added up equals 360 degrees total. And if you subtract the two that you already have, that would be 204 that we're subtracting. So we would have 156 left over. And then if you divide that by 2, you would still get 78 degrees for that reason. So there's more than one way to figure it out. So the two beside each other are supplementary, or you could think of it as all of them would add up to 360. So I'm going to put the measure of angle A and the measure of angle D were 78 degrees. Okay, so let's look at example 2. It says in the isosceles trapezoid, the measure of angle S equals 70. Find the measure of angle P, the measure of angle Q, and the measure of angle R. So very similar to that first example. So if 70 is at the base of S, like that angle at the bottom, the other one at the bottom would have to be equal, so that would be angle R. The measure of angle R is equal to 70 degrees. To figure out the ones at the top, I would just simply say that that's got to be 180 minus 70 for each one of those. So 180 minus 70 is just 110, and then P and Q have the same measure. So let's put the measure of angle P and the measure of angle Q is 110 degrees. And then we're finished with example 2. So that's just practicing that simple property that base angles of an isosceles trapezoid are congruent. Let's look at another property of isosceles trapezoids. It says the diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid are also congruent. So the only thing I want you to add here is that AC would be congruent to BD in this picture. And then let's take a few notes on kites. Kites have some special properties about them that we need to write down. So a kite has exactly 2 pairs of congruent sides. So I'm going to label those. We have these little tick marks already over here. There's one pair right there with the 1 tick mark. And there's another pair right here with the 2 tick marks at the bottom. And you can tell that the ones at the top are smaller and the ones at the bottom are longer, so that kind of makes good sense with that picture. Another property is you have 1 pair of opposite angles that are congruent. And they're right here. S is congruent to W. Angle S is congruent to angle W. And then the diagonals are perpendicular. So in other words, in the middle there, they're all going to be 90 degrees in the center of the kite. So they form 4 90-degree angles. Notice there are no pairs of parallel sides. So it's the first figure we've looked at so far in this unit that has no parallel sides. So it's not a property, but it's good to make a note. Nothing in there is parallel. All right, let's look at a few more examples. Example 3 says finding angle measures in kites. Find the measure of angle 1, the measure of angle 2, and the measure of angle 3. All right, so they've given us 1 is in the middle, so that goes with the property we just wrote down where that has to be 90 degrees. So the measure of angle 1 being in the middle where the diagonals intersect makes it automatically a right angle of 90 degrees. If you notice, they're pointing to this little angle right here, which is 32 degrees. And so therefore we could say there's a triangle that forms in this corner. And so angle 2 would be 180 minus 90 minus the 32 degrees. And that would just be 58 degrees. So let's write the measure of angle 2 was 58 degrees. And then what we also know is that these triangles at the top of that kite would be congruent, because if this one is also 90 degrees right here, and these sides are congruent, it's like what we have called before, well, let me say one more thing. They share this leg right there. So these triangles, let me grab a different color. These legs are congruent, these angles are 90 degrees, and then this leg is congruent. So what happens is those triangles at the top of your figure, of your kite, are congruent because of the hypotenuse leg theorem that you learned in Math 2. And so the measure of angle 3 would have to also be 32 degrees because it's the same as that one that's sitting right beside it. Okay. So just know those triangles are congruent, long story short, and you can make that one 32 degrees. Example 4 says the measure of angle 1, measure of angle 2, measure of angle 3 are what we're looking for. And they've given us this little kite that's sitting on its side down here. Again, I would just go ahead and put this 1 in the middle as the easy one because those are always 90. So the measure of angle 1 is 90 degrees. They gave us 46 degrees, so we know that this little angle right beside it is also going to be 46 degrees because we know those triangles would be congruent. And that would help us figure out angle 3 because now we could say that we have a 90-degree angle and that's in a triangle right there. So 180 makes up this whole triangle minus the 90-degree angle minus the 46-degree angle will give us the measure of angle 3. So the measure of angle 3 ends up being just 44 degrees. All right, so let's just look at one more example for your notes. Example number 5 says find the values of the variables for a kite. So we know about a kite that these sides are congruent and that these sides down here at the bottom are congruent. And so it would help if we start with these two at the bottom because they both have x, so we could use them to solve for x. The problem at the top here is that one of them has y and the other has x. So that's not going to help us to get started. Let's use the ones that have the same variable. So I'm going to say 2x plus 4 is equal to 3x minus 5. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides, and I get 4 equals x minus 5. Add 5, so I get x is equal to 9. So I've got x. Now I can use it to help me get the y. So let's plug it back in at the top. I have 9 plus 6 over here, which is 15, and that's equal to 2y plus 5. So 2y plus 5 is equal to 15. Would help me get y. And I could subtract 5, so I get 2y equals 10. Divide by 2, so y is equal to 5. And now I have both of my variables, and that is enough for the notes so far for trapezoids and kites.